Hey everyone, today I have 4 tips for you related to time stretching on the K.O. The first 2 are going to relate to things you might not be aware that you can do, such as making all notes in a chord the same length, and then time stretching to a number of bars that's not allowed by default. And then I want to go over into a couple of troubleshooting issues that hopefully will be helpful for you, specifically some issues you might run into when chopping a sample using time stretching, and then some time stretching issues that come up when you're using an external clock. Just so you know, I'm using firmware 1.1.2, so if you're using a different firmware, this may not all apply to you. Okay, so let's talk about time stretching a one-shot to make sure that all the notes in a chord are the same duration. Let me go ahead and pull up a one-shot here. Next, I'm going to enter keys mode by pressing keys. Now, it will play this across different notes. But one thing you may actually already be able to hear is that if I play right here, this is going to last much longer than an octave higher, which would be half as long. The issue with this is that I'm going to change this into key mode. So I'm going to hit Shift, go into sound edit mode, go over to sound mode, and I'm going to change it from one shot to keys mode. Now I can play this polyphonically, but if I play that octave, this higher note will drop off before this note does. Which could be fine, that could be exactly what you're going for, but what if you have a chord or a bunch of notes that span multiple octaves, and sometimes they're very short and sometimes they're longer? That's where time stretching is going to be helpful. So I'm going to hit plus, and I'm going to move over to where it says Tim or time, and then I'm going to actually change to BPM mode. So I'll talk about why you might not want to do bar mode in a second, but for now, just trust me, BPM mode is a little bit better. So we've already solved our issue. But we have this kind of jittery sound. So let me make sure the faders are reset. I've talked before that if you go fader to modulation and you add some modulation, it can kind of hide a little bit of that. Of course, distortion can hide it. Different filters probably can hide some of it, but you may want that sound. So all that just to say, it's very, very helpful if you enter in time stretch mode as well, so that way as you're playing your notes, they're not dropping off quicker based on how high-pitched they are. So let's talk about why you wouldn't want to use bar mode. So bar mode is fine, but it's just going to make things a little bit stretched out almost no matter what you do. And so it's almost the same in this case, but there are certain situations where you're going to have a one shot that isn't quite, a half of a measure or isn't quite a whole measure or whatever, and you can trim it and stuff like that, or you could avoid all that and just go into BPM mode. Then you can make slight tweaks if you really want. Now let's talk about stretching a sample to be 3 bars. So by default, if I take a sample, let's load up another one here. Okay, so I've loaded up a little vocal loop that I got from a Native Instruments sample pack. So let's say we want to take this and we want to stretch this to a certain number of bars. If we enter sound edit mode, we can go over to timing again, and let's stretch it by bar. And we'll see what sounds good. So is it 1 bar? That's a bit fast. 2 bars? Sounds pretty close. 4 bars sounds a little bit slow, right? But what if we wanted to stretch it to 3 bars? This isn't a 3-bar sample, but what if we wanted to do that? Well, we can. It just requires a little bit of math. So something I've learned recently is that this applies this stretch, the sound edits time stretch before it applies the time fader to the whole group. So what this means is that if you do a bit of math, if we know that we're looking for 3 bars, and right now it's stretched to 4 bars, I can make the playback rate 4/3, and it's going to stretch to 3 bars. I hope I could put an equation like right here that might help tell you how to do that, but it's based on the reciprocal. So here's what I mean. So let's go ahead and let's change our time fader to be 1.33, which is 4/3. And then I'm going to go back here to the main, and let's make this 4 bars, so that way we can hear that it's only 3. Oh, before I forget, I'm also going to edit this so that way it's just a one-shot now, so that it plays it all the way through. And I'm just going to enter it right here. So let's see what happens. So it stretched it to exactly 3 bars. Okay, so let's say that I go back to that same sample and I still want it to be 3 bars, but let's just use 2 instead, just for the sake of this example. I can still do the same thing, it's just going to require me to change the timing fader to be the opposite. So now, instead of playing 4/3 faster, I want it to play 2/3 slower, or at 2/3 the rate. So let me show you what I mean. So let's open up our timing fader, and let's bring it down to 0.67 is where we're going to go. And what I'm doing is I'm getting it close, and then I'm holding down Shift so that way it more precisely changes the fader value. And let's go back here, and let's hear what happens. Is it exactly 3 bars? Let's hope. Yep, sounded like it to me. So this is a way that you could, with just a bit of math, stretch things out way further. So let's say that we have a 4-bar loop. I don't have a 4-bar loop loaded up, so we're just going to play this one real slow. I'm going to change this to a 4-bar loop. Then I'm going to change the timing fader to being 0.5. And now it will stretch our sample out to last exactly 8 bars, even though the max that you can choose by default is 4 bars. So hopefully that makes some sense. That was kind of mind-blowing for me, because also that means that if you really wanted to, you could stretch it down to 16 bars if you do 0.25 with the timing fader, and you have the sound edit time stretch to 4 bars. Okay, so I've pulled up a sample here from a record, and I'm going to stretch it out and then chop it and show you some issues that you might run into.
My voice is now recorded out of phase and should have a diffuse and directionless quality.
Okay, so that's our sample. And what I'm going to do here is let me edit it, and I'm going to make it a certain number of bars. I'll just guess until it sounds like he's talking at his normal rate. So let's go back to bar.
My voice is now recorded out of phase. My voice is now recorded out of phase and should have a diffuse and directionless quality.
Okay, so that sounds close enough. So my point is that he sounds, with this time stretch, like he's talking at a pretty normal rate. But something weird is going to happen if you chop it. So let me just chop this sample.
My voice is now recorded out of phase and should have a diffuse and directionless quality. Voice is now recorded out.
It sounds very different than it did before, and that's because it's saving those time stretching settings and applying it to each pad that you're chopping that sample to. So each of these pads are now stretched to 2 bars. And this becomes a huge mess, actually, if you decide to take that same sample and auto chop it. Because now each one of these pads is going to be 4 bars, or 2 bars? Yeah, 2 bars. And it can't even stretch all these samples that far. So the way to avoid this is by using BPM mode for the time stretching. I opened up Sound Edit again and went back to the Tim menu, and now I am in BPM mode. Oops. So now I've gone back to the original sample and made sure that's in BPM mode. And at this point, if I auto chop, I won't have that same issue.
Is now recorded out of phase. It should have a diffuse and direction.
And the cool part about having all of these set to be synced to the BPM is that I can change the playback then, right? Oops, that's the metronome volume, my bad.
My voice is now recorded out of phase.
So it's responding to our BPM changes, and that's affecting all the pads like equally, because they're not stretching it out to a certain bar length, but they're just kind of adjusting the play rate based off of the like set BPM compared to the BPM of the project. Okay, so I'm going to erase that project again. And right now I want to show you one last example, which has to do with what happens if you use the bar stretching while using an external clock. So right now I have my K.O. synced to the OPZ. I have the OPZ playing at 90 beats per minute, and it just has a 4 on the floor pattern. Okay, so now I have that vocal sample pulled up from before. I have the OPZ sending a clock to the K.O. and it is sending a clock at 90 beats per minute, and it's also going to play a 4 on the floor drum line. Now, what I want to demonstrate is this still thinks that the project tempo is whatever it was before you connected the external device, and this wreaks havoc on some of the stretching capabilities of the K.O. So let's edit our vocal sample here, and let's turn it to bar mode. And we have it set to 2 bars, right? So if I have that on, let's check that it's a 1-shot. Oh, there we go. So this should play exactly 2 bars. Let's make this 4 long. Let's add our note there. And when I hit play on the OPZ, what you'll hear is that this ends much sooner than 2 bars. So what happened? Well, the K.O. still believes that the tempo for the project is 120. And so it doesn't matter, it's going to play it back at that same rate, whether I have it playing at 90 or 200 or whatever in between. It still thinks that the tempo is 120. One kind of neat thing, though, is that it does respond, even if it says external. If you hold down tempo, you can still enter in the tempo you want. So I'll hit 90 and enter. So that was exactly 2 bars because now this matches the tempo it's receiving. Okay, so I'll be honest, I just spent a while trying to take that sample in BPM mode to show you that that works more easily, but I didn't find it to be that much easier. So I'm just going to leave that right there and say, if you're going to stretch a sample based on the number of bars and you have an external clock, you're going to want to manually make sure that the K.O.'s internal clock and the project and on that specific scene match whatever the external clock is going to be. So I hope you learned something. Please let me know if you have any questions, and thank you for watching.